Hello everyone, welcome to Luan Banqiansu. Ladies and gentlemen, the Kremlin's war machine is on the verge of collapse. The battle in southern Ukraine is no longer a deadlock of entrenched positions. A tactical strike has just been delivered by Ukraine through the Orykiv-Tokmak axis, aiming straight at the heart of the land corridor connecting Russia with Crimea. What caused Russia's proud 58th Army to fall into a state of paralysis in just a few weeks? The Kremlin's massive war machine cannot operate without its vital supply lines. In southern Ukraine, the land corridor connecting Crimea to mainland Russia is just such a vital artery. Vladimir Putin has staked everything on this route, where millions of tons of fuel, ammunition, and tens of thousands of soldiers are continuously sent to hold the occupied territories. However, the existence of the entire Russian military system here is severely threatened because it depends entirely on a fragile network of railways and roads. A war tragedy is gradually taking shape as Ukraine has found the Achilles heel in Russia's solid defense system, which is the Orykiv-Tokmak axis. This direct strike at the shortest and most vulnerable route leading to Melitopol in the sea has pushed the Russian command into a state of real panic. Looking at the battle map and the horrific losses over the past 30 days, we can see an undeniable truth. Ukraine's advance in the south is irreversible. In the western Zaporizhia region, specifically along the Orykiv axis, strategic positions such as Novoyakovlivka, Lusika, and Koimovska have been liberated. These were the most fortified barriers, serving as gateways in the deep defense system that Russia painstakingly built. At the same time, on the Zulakula axis, Ukraine is entering its most active phase with significant advances around Tanova and Novozhivka. The dangerous gray zone between the two lines of fire is now completely under Kyiv's control. Most notably, their direct opponent is not an ordinary unit, but the Russian 58th Combined Arms Army. But field reports confirm that this unit is completely exhausted, has lost the ability to counterattack, and is being pinned down in place. Ukraine's resilience shows that they are only a few tactical steps away from the enemy's supply lines, and the collapse of this corridor is becoming clearer with each passing day. The strategy to break this corridor does not rely on isolated suicide attacks, but rather on a sophisticated military doctrine with 3 simultaneous thrusts aimed at paralyzing the command structure and destroying Russia's reserve forces. The first and most intense spearhead is on the Oryzobat axis, where Ukraine's heavy mechanized brigades are using their full strength to strike directly south toward Tokmak and Melitopol. The second spearhead at Zulapol plays a supporting and tactical diversionary role. The goal is to cut across supply lines by advancing to the southeast. If Russia shifts troops west to stop the main attack, eastern pressure will collapse the entire front line. The third spearhead at Dnipro acts as a psychological and technical pincer movement. Even without having to cross the river with large-scale armored forces, Ukraine still keeps the Russian army on high alert through special forces landing and infiltration operations. Even the control teams and drones of Russia's 98th Airborne Division are pinned down in Kherson, unable to be redeployed to reinforce the southern front. This 3-pronged attack has completely paralyzed Russia's decision-making process. So, where is the weakest point in this solid defensive system? The answer is the Oryvak defensive line. This was not a random choice by the Ukrainian military leaders. This is the shortest route into the land corridor's heart. After thoroughly testing and analyzing Russia's defensive responses in 2023, the Ukrainian army has returned with a completely different mindset, more experience, superior electronic warfare technology, and a highly focused objective. Their ultimate goal is not to occupy some city center for show. In military logic, the city is a symbol, but the roads are the lifeline. The ultimate target is the M14 highway and the parallel railway network around Melitopol. To bring this route within the firepower range of artillery and FPV drones, the game is basically over. The ability to instantly strike any tanker truck or ammunition train passing through there is the key to victory. More than just stretches of asphalt, Ukraine is carrying out a large-scale campaign to destroy the entire nervous system of the enemy. A land corridor is essentially a giant living organism made up of storage depots, communication lines, energy infrastructure, and an air defense network. Currently, Ukraine is systematically dismantling this system. From the energy infrastructure in Tokmak to the logistics warehouses in Berdens and the communication towers in Inhoda, all are gradually being wiped off the map. In just the attack on March 18, 2026, Ukraine destroyed two Buckham-1 air defense systems, two large fuel depots, and key satellite communication infrastructure. This is a staged scenario designed to make Russia's rear blind and paralyzed before the final ground offensive begins. When the pressure from infantry units combines with this perfect destruction of infrastructure, the outcome is inevitable. The connection between Crimea and Russia is on the verge of being cut off, and the flow of supplies has already begun to stall. Looking deeply into the tactical data, this is not simply a change of borders, but a masterpiece of military engineering. Along the 1,100-kilometer front line, Ukraine's latest offensive has created a seismic shift at the junction between Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhia. The liberation of 400 kilometers of territory after months of being bogged down in trench warfare, this serves as evidence that the balance of the battlefield can be reversed in an instant. This power does not come from brute force, but from the precision of intelligence and technological adaptation. Elite units like the Sklyre Battalion, with only 200 highly mobile troops, have pierced through even the densest defensive lines, writing a new, tragic, and fierce chapter in this conflict. Strategic positions like Ternop have been retaken after 3 days of intense fighting. According to reports from the Kyiv Independent, more than 600 Russian soldiers were put out of action in just this limited-scale local operation. The advance did not stop at Ternop. Taking advantage of the momentum, the Ukrainian army quickly swept through the villages of Orykiv-Tokmak and Nuryhoka, expanding their area of control. Opposing them, Russia's 58th Combined Arms Army could not withstand the sudden and coordinated assault.
Chặt trên này, buộc phải tháo lùi.
Russian units that once had to pay the price with months of enduring heavy artillery fire and horrific casualties to cross rivers and seize territory are now being forced into chaotic retreats across those very same rivers. The near-complete liberation of the Dnipropetrovsk region means that Russia has lost its operational depth in this area. The question is why territories that were gained at such a terrible cost over many months changed hands in just a few weeks. The answer lies in a combination of technological blindness and slow adaptation in tactical response. In early February 2026, the Stalin headsets that Russia was illegally using for everything from core battlefield communications to drone control were suddenly disconnected. All communications were cut off, coordination collapsed, and the Russian army was left completely blind. Ukraine immediately seized the opportunity by deploying Hunter Squad tactics. 20 reconnaissance drone soldiers identified the target outpost. FPV drones delivered the first strike, and then the Hunter platoon finished the job of clearing the battlefield. This cycle of identification, attack, and clearing was completed in just a few minutes, neutralizing Russian units before they even understood what was happening. The tragic grandeur of this situation was summed up in the account of a battalion commander from the 95th Air Assault Brigade. They had infiltrated deep into enemy rear lines under fog and white snow, destroying the opponent's reconnaissance drones, leaving the Russian forces completely blind on the front lines. About 60 Russian soldiers were surrounded, and even the surrounding defensive positions were unaware of the Ukrainian presence until a week later. This profound defeat was not just a local retreat. Field reports and AI intelligence from the Institute for the Study of War showed that Ukraine's moves were disrupting the entire spring and summer 2026 offensive plans that Moscow had prepared for months. The strategic momentum that the Kremlin had built for a large-scale breakthrough campaign along the Lyman and Zaporizhia axes evaporated because of the sudden crisis in the south. When a deep collapse occurred at a single point on the front, the enemy was forced to sacrifice their elite units to stabilize the defensive line. A Russian commander had to redeploy VDV paratrooper units from the east to the south to fill this huge gap. Originally, these units were meant to be the main assault force for the spring campaign at Povost and Lyman, but now they had to play the role of desperate firefighters. The domino effect began to appear. Every unit sent to reinforce the south further weakened the offensive plans in Donetsk. The problem didn't stop at depleted reserves. The Ukrainian army turned the 400-kilometer newly recaptured area into a giant trap. Learning from the past, Kiev launched a rapid fortification effort with solid concrete layers. These new positions became perfect kill zones where artillery and FPV drone fire overlapped tightly. Narrow passages and riverbeds were designed to lure Russian counterattacks into a meat grinder with no escape. We are also seeing the results of Ukraine's drone warfare concept around Major Hanoi. In February and the first week of March alone, dozens of Russian communication antenna towers were destroyed, systematically dismantling Moscow's drone control network. When the 400-kilometer reclaimed area was turned into an impregnable fortress, Russia was almost completely expelled from Dnipro, creating a critical rupture in the supply chain. The vital logistics corridor between Koymyr and Mariupol is now entirely within the range of HIMARS and ATACMS missiles. The convoys carrying fuel and ammunition are now nothing more than moving targets. The Russian soldiers pushed across the river are now under drone fire on July 24th as they try to maintain supplies over makeshift pontoon bridges. The logistical chokehold makes troop rotation and evacuation of the wounded impossible, triggering a chain reaction of disobedience on the front lines. This retreat has also exposed the Kremlin's biggest secret: Russia is running out of manpower. The model of recruiting mercenaries with money from poor regions is collapsing. Data from open-source intelligence platforms reveals a harsh reality. While Russia recruited about 27,400 new soldiers in December 2025, they lost more than 33,000 people on the battlefield. In January 2026, the situation became even more tragic as the number of casualties far exceeded the number of new recruits. For the first time in this long and bitter war, the rate of manpower loss is surpassing the ability to replenish, pushing the Russian army rapidly toward demographic collapse. The economic cost of maintaining this impossible equation is absolutely staggering. As the treasury began to run dry, the astronomical financial incentive packages once used to attract volunteer soldiers were reduced to just a tenth of their original value. The supply of volunteer soldiers dwindled, and the average age of Russian soldiers killed or wounded rose to between 46 and 52 years old in this deadlock. The Kremlin had to fill the trenches with more than 18,000 foreign mercenaries from 128 different countries, from Nepal to Cuba, from Central Africa to Syria. These people often don't know the language and lack military skills, and are being used as human shields in suicide attacks. Even young local recruits are being forced to sign contracts to go to the front lines under psychological pressure and threats. The most dangerous aspect of this humiliating situation is the political effect it creates. Putin is losing both on the battlefield and politically among the people. The Russian leadership has always promoted the idea of an inevitable victory, slow but steady, but the 12-kilometer-wide breach and the retreat across the river have shattered the illusion of invincibility. The deployment of elite units rushing from one front to another like a fire brigade in an emergency is the clearest evidence that strategic initiative has completely fallen into Ukraine's hands. This is a strong confirmation of the collapse of the entire military plan. This bitter reality is no longer a secret in the dark corridors of the Kremlin. The generals in command understand this better than anyone else, because they are the ones who signed the orders to deploy those units to the south in desperation. The oligarchs also feel it deeply when they look at financial reports showing that the war budget has been depleted. The security apparatus is seeing military compensation drop to 1/10, forcing them to staff the front lines with prisoners from the camps. And now, even the Russian people are beginning to vaguely realize the truth. A global power's status depends directly on its real military strength. And Russia's withdrawal from Dnipro is proof that this capability has completely vanished. This is a country that once promised to reshape the global energy market, threatened the world with nuclear weapons, and held veto power at the United Nations Security Council. Now it can't even hold on to a village on its own border. This aligns with the total collapse of diplomatic credibility. The allies of Moscow are witnessing this reality firsthand. The image of Russia as a reliable partner and a military superpower is disintegrating on the muddy fields of Dnipro. Beijing is quickly promoting its own weapon systems to countries that were considering buying arms from Russia, with a highly competitive underlying message. India, after purchasing the S-400 system, is now witnessing HQ-9B systems in Iran being destroyed within hours, and is starting to seriously question its own defense procurement strategy. The question of whether we are truly safe with Russian weapons is echoing from New Delhi to Riyadh, from Cairo to Angeles. Even the proxy networks that Russia operates through Iran are being severely shaken. Rolls-Royce shipments can no longer reach Ukraine because the production lines have been bombed to pieces. The key geopolitical card that Moscow held to delay the collapse in tactics and demographics has also become useless on the ground. Moscow's calculations were actually very simple. They expected a war between the US and Iran to break out in the Middle East, along with a global energy crisis that would force the world to focus its attention on the Gulf. According to that scenario, the U.S. would have to deploy aircraft carriers to the Iranian front. And as Europe struggles with oil prices, aid to Ukraine would gradually dwindle. A weakened Kiev would not be able to withstand Russia's spring offensive and would be crushed. However, Putin's seemingly perfect diversion strategy has completely failed for three key reasons. First, Western support has not decreased at all. On the contrary, it has become even stronger. The Nordic-Baltic 8 group approved a $500 million aid package right in the middle of the Iran crisis. Poland has raised its defense budget to more than 4% of GDP. Instead of frightening the West, this crisis only reinforces the perception that Russia and its allies are a global threat that must be pushed back. The second reason is the ammunition supply line from Iran has been cut off. The destruction of Iran's military infrastructure by the U.S. Air Force has wiped out the production lines, causing them to lose one of the most vital lifelines sustaining the war. And third, most importantly, while the whole world was focusing its attention on the Gulf region, Ukraine cleverly activated its comprehensive multi-front plan for 2026. While the world was looking toward the Middle East, Ukrainian forces quietly infiltrated deep into Russia's rear under the white snow to reclaim that strategic 400 square kilometer area. Ultimately, this counteroffensive is the clearest evidence that the momentum of the war has changed. A Russian army blinded by Stalin's disruptions is melting away before the Hunter battalions and running out of funds to compensate for the soldiers who are falling. The global illusion that Putin created by exploiting the Iran crisis has been shattered by Ukraine's Spears and FPV drones. The balance of the war is now completely in Kiev's hands. So, in your opinion, will Russia's loss of fire control over the M14 highway truly mark the end for the Khyber Peninsula? Or do they still have another card to play? And with Russian weapons being questioned for their effectiveness and manpower running out, can the superpower status of this player on the global geopolitical chessboard still be saved?